Give her.
Hey, I'm Thunderfuck from Thunderfuck and the Deadly Romantics. Where am I from? Well, as you can tell by my accent, I am from over the pond. I'm from a little town called Bedford, just north of London. And Bedford is the only town in the UK that is famous for absolutely nothing. I'm currently the vocalist in Thunderfuck and the Deadly Romantics, and I am proud to say, forget the accent, proud to say I'm from Hamilton, and have been on and off since around 1999. And not only am I the vocalist in Thunderfuck and the Deadly Romantics, but what gives me credibility is I'm the drummer in CJ Sleez. My main influences, not really a tough one. I've written about this before, I think. When I was about 14 and just started drumming, and I was awful. And I only started drumming because my parents thought I was taking the clarinet, and halfway through I gave up and said I wanted to be a drummer. But, as I said, I was about 14, and there was this guy in the village that I lived in called Willington. And not him, the village was called Willington. His name was Gary Winters, and he was probably 19, and he was a bass player. And he came over once he found out I was a drummer and set up his amp and bass and said, okay, let's, jam, let's, see what you've got. And he took me out, probably 15, 16, he took me to an open jam night in a little town called Biggleswade, and I was awful. But the thing I loved about Gary Winters is he never looked at me or treated me, A, like I was a stupid kid, or B, I was a shit musician. And he then introduced me to another guy who at that point was probably close to 30. His name was Paul Wiseman. And Paul Wiseman ran, I don't know what he ran, but he had a great big garage full of Daimlers and Jaguars. And so, and it wasn't the sort of garage where you go to buy a new car, if you get my drift. But in the back, he had a room set up with a drum set in there and all the amps and all the other stuff. And he is probably still one of the best guitar players I've ever worked with. His claim to fame was he could play the guitar solo in Sultans of Swing better than Mark Knopfler. And both of them treated me again like I was a musician, not some stupid kid wanting to be a rock star. They're my two main influences. My third main influence indirectly was probably my father, because my father back in the 50s was a lead saxophone player in one of the big dance bands in and around Falkirk and Glasgow in Scotland. And him and my mum immigrated to Canada, to Trail, British Columbia in 1956. And he joined the Trail Jazz Band, or whatever it was. And after about a year, he got called into his works office because he was a metallurgist. Don't ask me what that is. I have no idea. And his boss said to him, Larry, because that was his name, you need to make a decision. You either decide you're going to be a musician and play with these bands, or you quit that shit and pay attention to your career. So my dad quit, and he never played the saxophone again up until the day he died. And he always loved playing on the piano and playing on the accordion, but he never touched the saxophone again. So indirectly, I always felt that no one would ever tell me what I could and couldn't do. And if I wanted to be a rock star, damn it, I was going to be a rock star. So Dad passed a few years ago, but definitely he was one of my influences. I was, and probably still am, a total nerd. Most people have a really cool first record they ever bought. I don't. 1979, I would have been 10, something like that, and I went out and spent my good pocket money on the Replicas album by Gary Newman. Not even the cool Two Boy Army Are You Electric Gary Newman. No, I bought the album with Cars on it. So, I don't know, maybe I was coming back with my mum from grocery shopping or something, and I heard Bohemian Rhapsody on the radio and found out this was Queen. Now, my best friend at the time, and funnily enough, still my best friend a billion years later, was a guy called Carl Alban. And Carl was a massive fan of Queen. And so, I'm not sure what the first Queen record was that I got, but I'm pretty sure it was something obvious to a 12-year-old of greatest hits. Yeah. So I got Queen's greatest hits. And I remember whatever I was doing in the village with Carl, fixing motorbikes, fishing, fighting with each other, whatever, and I would sit there and go, oh wow man, I really like, good old-fashioned Loverboy. What record should I get next? And Carl would go, well, you know what, good old-fashioned Loverboy is on A Day at the Races, so maybe you should get A Day at the Races. My brother had a massive record collection, and he was into anything that was released by Stiff Records. So he was right into Ian Dury, Reckless Eric, and all that sort of stuff. And his favourite band was Genesis, before they became popular, like the stuff with Peter Gabriel and Steve Hackett. Now, when he was at university, I would go in his room and go through his record collection. And it was all this stuff I'd never heard of, wasn't interested in Genesis or, as I said, Ian Dury, Boomtown Rats. He wasn't interested in any of that stuff. I found he had A Day at the Races. So there it was. I stole that from him. And, Tie Your Mother Down, Somebody to Love. This is brilliant. Go to Carl. Listen, I like this We Are the Champions. What record's that? Oh, that's on News of the World. Great, next one I bought was News of the World. And this was how it worked for 2 or 3 years, up until the age of about 50. And I would go to Carl. Carl would tell... Now, Carl, in his bedroom, bear in mind we're in England, so he would have albums up on his shelf. And he would change them, depending on his mood. But it was always like, Motorhead live at Hammersmith. And I remember Saxon, Wheels of Steel. And Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast, he had so obviously 83 we're talking, and he would have these records up there, and so I'd sit there and look at them, love the album covers, and he'd play it, and oh, this is Motorhead, you've got to listen to this, and I'd be like, my poor 13, 14-year-old ears, you bear in mind, I just bought Hungry Like the Wolf, and, something by Wham, even though I had all the hair and whistle. But anyway, he was the one that got me into Queen. So by the time about 15, 16, I had amassed, it was 1984, right? So I had amassed all this Queen stuff, and that was all I listened to. And I moved to New Jersey, New York. I was going to school there. 8th grade, first time, ever, I couldn't believe all these 13-year-olds were wearing sweatpants. It's like there's all these little girls around and like wearing sweatpants. Like, what the hell are you thinking? Anyway, all the dudes are wearing The Who and Van Halen and, all these shirts, and I'm wearing, Queen. I got called all sorts of stuff, trust me. That's why I didn't do the wrestling. But, so, and subjected to MTV. But all they played on MTV was Let's Dance by David Bowie. That was on about 15 times a day. But that was how I got to hear, bands like, John Cougar, as he was known then, and the whole, Money for Nothing and blah, 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 and kind of pop when pop was rock, if you know what I mean. You'd see Cheap Trick, you'd see the Rolling Stones, you'd see all these bands that I'd never heard of in the UK, even though most of them were British. So I go back to the UK to finish my school, And massive Queen fan, got all the t-shirts, you know, Freddie Mercury, love him. No one knew he was homosexual at that point, not that it mattered, you know. Well, it did matter to a lot of people in America, because they kind of like didn't quite get the whole thing. But hey, I'd been Ziggy Stardust and Mick Jagger and Rod Stewart, so Freddie Mercury, hetero all the way. Anyway, so I go, and because my parents are still living in New York, I get sent to a boarding school. So I'm at this boarding school, and this guy comes up to me. I remember Jason Reed was his name. And he comes up and he's like, "Oh, you're the new kid, you know, blah, 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 blah. What sort of music are you into?" And I'm like, I like Queen." "Great, you're into heavy metal then." And next thing you know, I got Iron Maiden thrown at me, Marillion thrown at me, all the Saxon, the Praying Mantis, the first Def Leppard records, all of that sort of stuff. And I was like, I've been told I'm into heavy metal, so I'm into heavy metal. And I do remember the big announcement, because Queen, bear in mind, 1982, had a real flop with a record called Hot Space. Had Under Pressure on it, but also had crap like Body Language, and you know, they'd gone all like bad disco. Not Another One Bites the Dust, they'd gone bad disco. But this was it, Queen, back to their rock roots. They're coming out with an album called The Works. And I knew this was coming out whatever month it was, and I'm like, oh, well, these guys are all, here comes Queen. We're going to get Tie Your Mother Down. We're going to get White Man. We're going to get Liar. We're going to get, and what was it? Radio Gaga. Do you know what that did to a 14, 15-year-old boy that was trying to get credibility? Should have stuck with Duran Duran. My first gig, I got to admit that when we were talking about influences, I probably have to include my brother. Because my brother Ian, all through the 70s and 80s, and still to this day, constantly is going to gigs. And he took me to go see Genesis at the Birmingham NEC. He took me to go see King Crimson with my best friend Carl Alban. And he took me to see Queen at Leeds Football Ground. And all three of them were in 1982. So I would have been 13, and I do remember all three of them. I just don't remember in what order they were in. So it was one of those three bands was the first gig. But when I got to be about 15, I was going to college in Bedford, and London was only a 45-minute train journey away, and probably $3 or $4 to get there. And once you got to London, you would pull into King's Cross Station, and you were only about another $1 on the subway to Hammersmith. And Hammersmith is famous for the Hammersmith Odeon. So, I know that several times I was bored, or I had a buddy, or someone, you know, nothing going on, and I would convince them, or as I said, I often went on my own, would convince them to get the train, go into London, get to the Hammersmith Odeon, and go see whoever was playing. Bear in mind, this is at a time when concerts were £6, so about $9 to get in. And I know, between 85 and 86, I saw Keel, Motley Crue, Cheap Trick, Dio, Rat, and Ozzy Osbourne. So, those would have been my metal shows. And a quick story, I don't do any form of drugs. Not that I'm pretentious, and not that I'm lying to you, but, you know, weed makes me horribly ill, and I'm too fat and unhealthy for any of the better drugs. But I had a buddy that grew his own weed. Bear in mind, 1985 we're talking here, and so I'm not going to give his name away because he's probably still doing it. But anyway, we get on the train, and he's like, holds out this paper, but then he's got, I've never seen weed before, right? So I'm like, what the hell? I know why it's called weed. you know. So he's like, oh yeah, roll out some joints. Oh, you got to try this. You got to try this. All right. So 45 minutes. I must have smoked about 6 joints with this guy. No one else in the train. Just me and this guy. Conductor walks past. Tickets, please. Looks at us. You go, something smells good in here. And he kept walking. No one cared, right? And I'm like, dude, I'm going to use his name, dude. I'm like, dude, whatever this is, it's not affecting me. I'm fine. He's like, well, you know, it'll take a while to kick in. I'm like, no, I'm fine. We pull into King's Cross Station, and you got to walk up these stairs. And I was literally pulling myself up these stairs, right? And the gig we saw was Ozzy Osbourne on the Ultimate Sin Tour, Shot in the Dark, all that stuff, right? And I'd be sitting there at the Hammersmith Odeon, and I'd see, oh, everyone's standing up. So I'd stand up. And then I'm standing up there, and then I'd look around, and everyone's sitting down. Oh, so I'd sit down again. I was a total mess, and that was the first time I ever tried weed. I feel sorry for the row in front of me, because I actually had a bag of Doritos and yacked up all over them. And that's what happened the other 2 times I tried. Yacked up. So I just, you know, never bothered. So first metal gig, once again, Ozzy Osbourne, Dio, Rat, Keel, you know, who are Cheap Trick. Yeah. Oh, and Motley Crue. So, I don't know. Were they metal? They were in '85. Some of my favourite shows. Even though I was only 13, I have to say Queen in Leeds, because I do remember it, and Brian May told me personally at Cops Coliseum in 1993 that Leeds show was the best show Queen ever did. So, never mind Live Aid, I was out there, so it has to be one of my favourites, even though I was 13. A couple of years later, I went to go see Duran Duran at the Birmingham NEC on the Seven and the Ragged Tiger tour. And at that point, I think whenever you think of a live show, you think of a rock band, a punk band, a heavy metal band. You think of people with guitars and drums and blah. You don't think Wham plays live gigs. You don't think Tiffany plays live gigs. You know, I mean, now they don't, obviously. Pop stars, it's all tapes and all this sort of stuff. But going to see Duran Duran, and bear in mind, I was a burgeoning drummer. It was phenomenal to see 4 guys and a keyboard player being outstanding musicians. Now, you might not like Duran Duran, but if you're a bass player, you cannot deny John Taylor is a phenomenal bass player. You ask me as a drummer who my influences are, Roger Taylor from Queen, Cozy Powell from almost every British heavy metal band going, including Whitesnake and, you know, all the others, and Roger Taylor from Duran Duran. To sit there and listen to that rhythm section, you listen to Rio or Hungry Like the Wolf or Girls on Film, and that's not Pro Tools, that's not overdubbing, that is them playing, and to see that in concert was absolutely phenomenal. Motorhead. I saw Motorhead open for Black Sabbath in 1992 at Lulu's in Kitchener, and Motorhead opened the show, you know, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Motorhead to the show, and they opened with Ace of Spades, and I'm like, so now where do we go? You know? Admittedly, it was only about a 45-minute show since they were the opening band, but for a band of 3 musicians to blow you off stage was incredible. The funny story about that was watching Black Sabbath, because Black Sabbath came out and it was Neil Murray on bass, who I knew from Whitesnake. I think it was Cozy Powell drumming, who I knew from, you know, Whitesnake.
Good deal.
Iommi, obviously, on guitar, and I believe it was some guy called Ray Gillen. Not Ian Gillen, but it was a guy called Ray Gillen. And I can't remember if it was Dehumanizer or the Headless. It was the Headless Cross, I think, was the album they were touring. And of course, Lulu's used to be a Kmart. It was a massive place, and you could see people leaving. 3-4 songs in, everyone's walking out, not interested. Let's stop what they're doing. And Ray Gillen, if that was him, I don't know to be sure. All right, guys, it's great to be here in Kitchener, and we're going to take you back to the old days. We're going to do some old Sabbath songs for you. So all these people are like, oh, here's Iron Man, here's your fairies wear boots. They turn around, they all come back in, and Ian Gillan's up there going on about going back to the old days. Of course, for is it Ray Gillen? Yeah, so yeah. Ray Gillen, he's blabbling on, people are all coming back, and old days for Ray Gillen is the tosh that Sabbath did in 1986 to about 1988. So they start up playing all these songs, and everyone's like, I've never seen people leave a show twice. So, but that was my kind of Motorhead story. Recently, there's a band called Steel Panther. Whether you like them or not, live, they are brilliant. And they do what very few bands today do. They put on a show. They are there to entertain. And they would tour twice a year. I've seen Steel Panther 9 times. I went to their world tour for their second album. And I say I went to their world tour because it was one show in London. That was their world tour. So I've seen them 9, that was the first time I saw them. I've seen them 9 times since then. And it got to a point where twice a year they would play in Glasgow. And I think the 5th or 6th time I saw them, I never actually saw them on the stage because it was such a party back at the bar with an awesome soundtrack because they're playing live that it was great. Outside of metal, my other favourite show was, I don't think he ever really had much of a hit here, but was a pop singer called Robbie Williams. And Robbie Williams, Robbie Williams sells out stadiums and all that other sort of stuff. But he'd released an album, I don't know, I'm guessing 2014, something like that. And he hates touring, never tours. And so he'd announced this world tour, which for Robbie Williams was about 9 dates. But what he did was that if you phoned a number or you put your email in or whatever it is, you would get tickets to come down and see him at the O2 in London on the pre-tour rehearsal. So I actually got a couple of tickets, so I went down, and it was so cool because when he first came out, he's like, we may stop a song halfway through, we may, because this is the first time with us in this arena, and we want to do it with a live audience so we can see everything that's going on. And he was so funny and just didn't give a shit. The whole professionalism of the star putting on the show was gone, because he was like, oh, what do you think of the backing singers? They're frickin' hot, eh? And he was doing all of that stuff. Absolutely brilliant, but I could go on forever. I have countless favorite shows. Do it. Craziest thing that's ever happened at a show. Well, to be fair, if you guys have ever seen a Deadly Romantics show, they're unpredictable. I wouldn't say they're always crazy, but there have been a few. We used to have this bass player, good friend of mine, guy called Christian Kimmett, and we actually tagged him Over the Limit Kimmett. Quick story about Kimmett. He actually runs a bar in Edinburgh called Bannerman's. So if you run into him, tell him I sent you. He won't give you a free drink. He'll probably, punch you or whatever, but you can tell him. Anyway, so we're doing this tour in the UK, and I know I'm moving back to Canada. So we're talking 2016. This isn't the craziest, I'm just giving you the over the limit story, right? So I know we're coming back to Canada. And one thing that you can't ship back with you is alcohol. Now, I had this collection that we'd actually shipped from Canada to the UK and now had in the UK. And this was bottles of the most outrageous crap you can imagine that you wouldn't want to drink. You know, it's like passion fruit and banana liqueur, or like some Croatian rakia made with fig leaves. I mean, whatever this stuff was horrible. There was a reason why I had bottles of it. I mean, it was disgusting. Jack Daniels, that was gone. Canadian Club, that was gone. It was these, and there was probably 12 or 15 of these bottles. So I thought, okay, well listen, we're gone for 5 days. I'm going to throw this in the van, and if anyone wants to drink it, you can drink it. Kimmit, Christian, over that 5 days, and I'm not saying people in the band didn't have a swig and go, oh, that's disgusting. You know, I'm not saying that didn't happen. But Christian single-handedly wiped out those bottles, probably by day 3. And one of the things we said, Christian didn't have a driver's license. He lives, Edinburgh's one of these cities like Toronto, you know, you get around everywhere. He didn't need a license. But I said, you know what, Christian? You would never be able to get your driver's license. He's like, why not? I said, because you're never under the limit. And so that was how Over the Limit Kimmit came across. But 2 of my craziest stories are to do with Christian. We get to play the first gig with Christian. We're playing a bar in Glasgow called The Vale. And we're not a very technical band, you know, it's all 3-chord stuff. You know, dirty lyrics, but more of a show, you know. And Christian is off his tits. It was a bass player. You've only got 4 string. I think he only used 1 of them, you know, whatever it was. It wasn't difficult stuff. So he's up there climbing on tables. He's, you know, so then he gets up on the bar. The bar is very close to him. He's standing up there, you know, playing. He leans over and just barfs all over the other side of the, all over the other bar. Looks up. Did anyone see him? Yeah, everyone saw him. He's up there barfing. Comes back down, goes behind his amp. More of it, back out again, all over the thing, comes out. Alright, he's still playing his 1 string, and then just before the end of the show, because unfortunately his father passed away, before the end of the show he puts on this crazy cap and then has a shot of, you know, whatever. It was just like, that stuff's out, we're empty, let's go again. Same, I think it was the next tour, we're playing in Bedford, my hometown, right? And we're playing it. It's a pretty full club, Bedford Esquires, you know, good venue. And Christian gets up, you know, here he goes, Christian's going wandering again. Bear in mind, this wasn't, you know, wireless. Like, he had cords and everything tying him into whatever it was. Gets up on this table, and it's one of those, you know, those portable tables where you bring the legs down and just sit it there. Goes on there, this thing starts going, jumps onto the next table, which he thinks is solid. Boom! That table doesn't miss a beat. Wrecked 2 of the tables in the bar, didn't miss a beat. So that's my 2 crazy. There's a lot of crazy Christian stories. One that involves me. I do this thing live. Wireless mic, I always go out into the audience and, you know, I'll try and get people to sing words back or, you know, whatever it is. Try and get the audience involved. And so I'm out there and we're playing a bar called Ivory Blacks, which is in Glasgow. And so I come out and I see these guys there. They're not really paying attention, you know, but I go up to them and I'm like, hold the mic, and they're like, fuck off. And I'm like, oh, okay. So So I go over, you know, there's other people there. I'm like, oh, here's a bunch of guys singing away. Oh, hey, this is great. Go back to these guys, and he's sitting there. As I said, 4 or 5, he's sitting on his phone. Like this. And I'm like, okay, you know, and so I'm not going to say the C word. In fact, if you say, see you next Tuesday. How's that one, right? So he sits there, And it goes, well, the band's playing behind me. And he holds this up, and it says, "You're a CUNT." Fine. I look at him, and I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. Turn around, go back to these girls, blah, blah, blah. Turn around, and BAM! Just get knocked back. Guy, but I don't know what I said or did to annoy this guy, but BAM like this. And once again, back in those days, I didn't do a gig unless I was 9 beers and half a bottle of Jack in. So I wasn't feeling anything. So I go back up on stage, and I'm thinking, when these guys stop, I'm going to say something. See that guy, he just hit me, you know, or I'm not going to say anything, or whatever, who cares, you know. Gary comes up. Gary was our lead guitar player at the time. Gary comes over, and he's like, "What the hell happened to you?" You know, obviously he's playing, he's like, and I'm like, and he's like playing his nose, and I'm like, well, look, the guy had literally burst my nose. And so I did the rest of the gig. I mean, I looked like Gene Simmons had just dribbled all the blood out of his mouth. It was literally everywhere. And, you know, I don't know, that was the coolest effect. I mean, I didn't feel a thing. Even the next day I didn't feel anything. But that was a pretty crazy story. Past and current bands include a whole bunch of crappy cover bands that aren't worth mentioning. First serious band was probably Britney's Crack, which was never intended to be serious. And to be fair, we split up the band because it was getting too serious. I do remember we were playing a gig at the Underground in Hamilton, opening up for the Forgotten Rebels. And as I said, at that point I was the drummer. And I'm sitting there playing, and the crowd's mosh. It was a great crowd, a Rebels crowd, you know. And I'm moshing, and I mean the crowd's moshing. I'm sitting there drumming, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm sitting here playing to, I don't know, 150, 200 people, and I'm playing Britney Spears songs and Shakira and Ricky Martin. I'm like, you know, what the hell happened to my life? Even though they were. But we were a punk band, you know. We modelled ourselves after Me First and the Gimme Gimmes. Nice. So that's what we were doing. And Mickey had I don't know how you get a gig opening up for the Forgotten Rebels, but Mickey had literally phoned me up, and he said, "I want Britney's Crack to open up for the Rebels." And I was, okay. I mean, at that point, I was like, Forgotten who? Who are you? What? Who are you, Mickey? Mickey do what? You know. So we did this gig, and then Britney's Crack dissolved, and I always wanted to be a vocalist. I won't say singer because that implies melody. But there's this band in the UK in the 80s called Zodiac Mind Warp and the Love Reaction. And I just loved everything about them. They were these dirty biker looking, and they played music like, if you've never heard of them, it was like the Electric album by The Cult meets, you know, AC/DC. It's like that you know, that stuff. And that ended up becoming Thunderfuck and the Deadly Romantics, which of course, almost 20 years later, we're still there. So I could sit there and say, I've only been in 2 bands, Britney's Crack and Thunderfuck and the Deadly Romantics. But probably around the same time that Mickey phoned me up saying, you know, he wants Britney's Crack to open up for them, I said, well, you know, I don't know if we're really into it, and, you know, we're kind of at the end of our tether. And he's like, so are you going to be looking for another band? Something like that. And I'm like, why? And he's like, well, you know, I've got a solo project going called, I've just released a solo album called Welcome to My Basement. And, you know, I want to put a little trio kind of rock thing together. And I'm like, yeah, you're doing Rebel stuff? Because, like, I'm really not a punk guy. No, it's more like Slade. He loves Slade, right? So, like, 1974 British glam rock. Like, okay, yeah, well, you know, give me a call, and, you know, when you put that together, sure, I'll do it. And I remember phoning Johnny Budd, who's our guitarist in the Deadlies, and I'm like, yeah, who is this Mickey the Saddest guy? It's like, somehow he got my number, and he's phoned me like 4 times about the crack opening up for him at the Underground, and now he wants me to be his drummer. And you could almost hear the phone, you know, on Johnny's end. So, you don't know who the Rebels are? And I'm like, are they anything like that crap band Teenage Head that you like? You know, which, to be fair, nothing against Teenage Head, but everything against Johnny, because I just got to rip the piss out of him all the time. So, I did the Mickey DeSantis show, which was me, Mickey, and Mark Datsky. We did 4 or 5 shows. Datsky was in the Deadly Romantics after the Mickey DeSantis, or before, I can't remember. It was going at the same time. And then, of course, I move over to the UK. And in the UK, I kept kind of getting, I couldn't say I was in the band, but I kept getting roped in to do gigs with bands. So there was, you know, a couple of bands that had been, you know, very big in the late 80s, early 90s, and were still, you know, touring and doing their thing. One of which was the Choir Boys, and another one was called the Dogs d'Amour. And I happened to become very good friends with Tyler, who was fronting the Dogs. And so it was probably about 5 or 6 years into our relationship, and we were talking about something, and Tyler goes, "You play the drums?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why did you never tell me?" So the next thing you know, I'm doing 3 or 4 dates with the Dogs d'Amour, and then turns out to be with Spike from the Choir Boys, and then ended up playing with Warrior Soul, because Christian plays in Warrior Soul, introduced me to Corey, go down to Detroit to hang out with Corey and Christian. Next thing you know, Canadian tour, Bruce. And Corey's like, he sounds like, if you ever listen to Enough's Enough, Chip's Enough, he's always like, "Hey brother, what's going on, man? Oh yeah, look at the trim around here." He talks like that. And Corey's the same. Sings brilliantly, but vocally, oh yeah, he's like, "Hey brother," you know. And he's like, "Man, yeah, we're going to come back and we're going to do a Canadian tour, and you're going to be the drummer." I'm like, okay. So, you know, I can put Warrior Soul on my resume, I can put Dogs d'Amour on my resume, I can put Mickey the Saddest on my resume. Was I in their bands? Not really. I'm too busy focusing on being a rock star in my own. What do I like most about being a musician? Well, I'm not too sure I'd term myself a musician, because that somewhat implies talent. But, you know, oh, that's kind of what I like about being a musician. Can't really complain about that sort of stuff. Listen, any guy will tell you what do they like. They might not tell you, but hey, this is the Thunderfuck opinion. What every musician likes about being a musician is being the center of the party. And that's what it's about. When I set out the whole concept of the Deadly Romantics, I don't want you to sit there and find deep meaning. There is no deep meaning in Fucked by Rock and Roll. There is no deep meaning in Starfucker or How Do I Taste. No. Who are we? We're Alice Cooper. We're Kiss. We're the New York Dolls. When you come to a Deadly Romantics show and you pay, I don't care if you get in free. You pay for $5. You pay $10 to get in. It is my job to entertain you. And that's what I get out of being a musician. The fact that I don't care if I'm playing to 6 people. That's 6 people that are going to leave that venue with an opinion. They may think we're the worst thing they've ever seen in their lives. They may leave the venue humming Fucked by Rock and Roll to themselves. But they're leaving with an opinion, and they're going to remember who the Deadly Romantics are. And that's what I love. What I hate is everything else that goes around it. You cannot escape drama. Now, I love being from Hamilton, and I love being considered a Hamilton band. But the amount of drama that has circumvented the Deadly Romantics, or the amount of drama that people have preconceived about the Deadly Romantics. We're not racist. We're not sexist. We're not, I don't know, pedophiles. And we've been accused of all of these things. And we sit there and go, we're a good time rock and roll band. Leave the drama at the door, or don't come and see us. Favorite food? Do you guys know what Scotch eggs are? Probably not, but Scotch eggs, hard-boiled egg, wrapped in seasoned sausage meat, then covered in breadcrumbs and baked in the oven for about 40 minutes. They're a pain in the ass to make, which is why you can never really find them at British stores or anything like that around. But in the UK, honestly, these things are like 2 for £1, which is awesome. And when I want to be a kid, I'll actually make, 10 or 12 of these things. And you've got to have them with, what do you call them? Like the Chef Boyardee spaghetti hoops. That real garbage stuff. Fine Italian pasta, as I call it. But that is the best meal you can possibly have. Aside from that, bacon, anything. I don't care what it is. If there's bacon in there, in fact, just on this favorite food thing, I'm an entrepreneur, obviously, because you've never seen anything like the Deadly Romantics. But I've come up with a lot of ideas. My half Christmas tree is brilliant. I always thought you get a Christmas tree, cut it in half, you can hang it on the wall. Save space. Quarter Christmas tree, put it in the corner. Anyway.
I have a half one.
I know, they now made them. It was my idea 20 years ago. But anyway, you know how in Canada you have these, what are they called, chip vans? Where there's like a van and you go in and you just get French fries, I guess. A bacon van. Why does no one really want to make bacon at home? Because it stinks the house out. But if I had a caravan and all I did was make bacon, and you show up on a Sunday morning, I want 2 pounds of cooked bacon. There you go. You don't have to pay $7.99 for that pre-made crap that you get at Walmart, No, fresh bacon, there you go. Put it on anything you want. I'd make $1 million. Maybe I should quit the band. My most useless talent, in my mind, songwriting. Because I pay so little attention to it, it's borderline irrelevant to the Deadly Romantics. But some people seem to like it, so I guess it's a useless talent to me. It's either that or the one the girls like. Hang on, you might want to zoom in on this. The girls like this one.
Ooh.
So we've got to focus on the index finger. Now imagine, hang on, if we go more like, have you got me? Because it has to be more like this.
Yep.
Right? So then, once it's in, you go, hey, how's that? That's a pretty useless talent. Cheers! Thank you, Thunderfuck, Deadly Romantics. Love you. So, Thunderfuck from the Deadly Romantics here. I just want to say, this video has been brought to you by Mickey the Sadist. Welcome to my basement. No, seriously, I'm sure Mickey loves you. Steve Reniewick, you are awesome, my friend. Thank you for coming down and paying some attention to my little band.